Hi, guys. I'm Baruch. You're listening to the Postkahanism podcast, the show where we discuss Israel's past, present, and future from a far right wing perspective. Today, we're talking with Dr. Edward Luttwak about Israeli strategy. Dr. Luttwak has written multiple excellent books on strategy, which I encourage you all to check out, including Coup d'etat, a practical handbook, the grand strategy of the Roman Empire, and the grand strategy of the Byzantine Empire. Dr. Luttwak, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Well, I do write books, that is true, but I made my living as a military advisor, contracts to advise the Pentagon, advise certain other countries, and I made my living as a contractor in a field, actually fighting, using professional or volunteers and things like that, fighting in the actual wars in Latin America and so on. As a contractor who doesn't write an essay, but rather goes and does something. In regard to Israel, I was a volunteer in the 67 war. I was up in the Etzba Galil, where there was no army then because the entire army was in Egypt or Jordan or somewhere. And so it was Haga, and the Haga worked very well. Unlike October 7, it was a Haga that functioned. And actually, I had an opportunity to shoot a rifle as an actual living Syrian who then stopped to live. It was a Chechi, by the way, a Mauser. It had 1897, 1897-37. Then I was in the 73 war. I came before the 67 war, a couple of weeks before. 73, I was caught by surprise like everybody else. I arrived in the middle of it, but between 67 and 73, I'd worked for Amman, the head of Amman, General Arole Yariv, a celebrity at the time, Arole, and he arranged for me to have to do something nice, which is I joined a unit that was created from captured Russian equipment and drifting people right in Sinai from Bilgafka. And this new unit, I went and crossed the Suez Canal in a BTR, an eight-wheeler. Well, it was a great thing. In 82, of course, it lasted very little. But by that time, I'd become a very close friend of Janusz Bengal, the first Israeli officer, the last, who commanded the 5-division Chayil, or Corps in English. But that thing lasted a very short time, but there was interesting aftermath in Lebanon and so on. So I had some experience using weapons. And Israel, I never was in the Israeli army. I had been trained in the British Army as a cadet at a very young age, and that's the only training I ever had. So my approach to all Israeli strategic matters is always entirely pragmatic. I believe that the important thing for Jews is to add one house and one field. One house, one factory is for the Jews to build things. That's what's important. Everything else is less important. You see, David Ben-Gurion learned Turkish, went to Constantinople, Istanbul, to study law because the Ottoman Empire had ruled the area for centuries, and everybody thought he might rule it for centuries. So the Ottoman Empire disappeared a few years later, went poof, just went off. So next came the British, and then the whole Jewish leadership had to learn how to deal with the British, and they all had to learn to speak English, and so on and so forth. And everything was done in terms of the British Empire control of mandatory Palestine. And they worked very hard to try and deal with the British. And they were actually making progress, but then the British abandoned the area. The British Empire more or less went poof, like the Ottoman Empire. And by the time they knew how to deal with the British, they weren't British. The Americans refused to provide any help whatsoever in 1948, of course, because the CIA, wrong as usual, estimated that the state of Israel wouldn't last more than a few weeks. And therefore, General George Marshall Secretary of State, the very commander of all Allied forces, enormous prestige. The Secretary of State refused to meet the Israeli ambassador because he was very busy and Israel wouldn't last more than a few weeks. Then, of course, there was a long and difficult period until the French needed support because they were fighting in Algeria. So suddenly the French were very generous. There were airplanes, there were tanks, light tanks. They didn't have real tanks, but mainly the Mirages and this and all kinds of other help provided the paratrooper training. All the Israeli paratroopers used to have French equipment, the French doctrine, and so on. And then in '67, de Gaulle said no and abandoned. They didn't want to deal with Israel anymore. In the meantime, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq were getting really strong, and getting tanks, not like by 12 or 15 tanks, but 500, 1,000, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 tanks, and getting MiGs and other Soviet aircraft, which, contrary to legend, are very good aircraft, certainly MiG-21. In Vietnam, in fighting the U.S. Air Force, even the MiG-17 shot down American fighters. MiG-19 also. The MiG-21 was a formidable aircraft. The Arabs had hundreds of them. So that was very, very difficult. And it continued to be difficult until the Soviet Union went poof, just like the Ottomans and the British and so on. Right now, the problem, Israel appears to be surrounded by enemies, but in reality, this is all Iran. Because Iran has been allowed to attack everybody, attack Americans, everybody, under the Obama doctrine that Iranians can attack anybody, but nobody must attack Iran. And in fact, one of the Obama people who remains in the administration, President Biden, has no Biden people in the White House because they're all dead or retired, the ones who grew up with him. And so he has Obama people. And I remember that I happened to be in the Pentagon the day after the Iranian attack on Israel with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. And the very senior White House person, whom I shall not name because I'm a contractor and so on, rushes to the Pentagon desperate that the Israelis might strike back. And I asked him, I said, tell me, is your family in Tehran right now? Do you have your baby child in the Tehran hospital that you are so terrified that Israeli might strike back? Is that your concern? They've just attacked Israel, and their attack was... So this is a problem. But in the meantime, Iran's foreign exchange reserves are smaller than Serbia. Serbia is not one of the rich countries in the world, but the Iranians have smaller foreign exchange reserves than Serbia. Their population, Serbia population is about 6.5 million. They are 91 million people. They don't have foreign currency. The rial is not such a strong currency as it used to be. In fact, you now need 5,200 rial to get $1. And they are critically dependent on oil exports because they export almost nothing else, and they do need to import a lot of important things for the babies and children of Iran, such as North Korean missile components, Chinese stuff, and so forth. So now the question is that Israel is surrounded by enemies from Columbia University to Hezbollah to the Kataib in Iraq, the Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, to the Syrian group, and of course the Houthis. Now, the Houthis are doing much more damage to Europe than they're doing to Israel, or maybe 10 times more, because the ports, Italian ports, don't get the traffic from Asia and Africa. They don't get the oil tankers coming in, and huge costs. But the Europeans are on holiday right now. It's August, and therefore none of the air forces they have spent a lot of money on air forces, these Mediterranean countries, Italy, France, and so on. But they're on holiday. You see, it's August, so they can't attack the Houthis. As for the Italian Mediterranean navies, they're actually quite active right now. They're conducting elaborate and spectacular exercises off the coast, near the Côte d'Azur in France, off the coast. They can't go into the Red Sea to protect Italian commerce. So essentially, the Iranians are doing all these things. Nobody's doing anything to Iran. Nobody. Okay, Israel Air Force delivered a package to the Russian S-300 anti-aircraft missile batteries, actually south of Isfahan, not Natanz. But Israel has not done anything. So the Americans, even when the Iranians attack these small American outposts in Syria and Iraq and kill Americans, the Americans don't attack Iran. So I think there's something wrong with this whole picture. And, but recently one sees that things are changing because the attack on Hodeidah airport, the oil port in Yemen, is much further than Kharg Island, which is the locality where all the Iranian oil is exported. It's much farther, hundreds of kilometers in front. Israel was able to reach Hodeidah, destroy the entire oil depot there. All the electricity in Western Yemen comes from burning petroleum. They have no hydro or anything else. So they actually knocked out the electrical system as well by destroying the oil port. And all of that is hundreds of kilometers further from Israeli bases than Kharg Island. So if the Iranians were to launch an attack against Israel, which they're still promising to do, and if that attack were to be successful, and let's say kill 50 people from Iran, the next thing that would happen, I presume, after Hodeidah, is that the Kharg Island depot will be destroyed. Now, as of today, what happens at Kharg Island is they load tankers of the countries buying oil from Iran, which is, of course, not any American company or British company, but the Chinese and so on. When the oil is loaded in a tanker, the funds, the payment is transferred by wire to the central bank in Tehran. And the central bank in Tehran uses this to buy food and immediate necessities because, as I told you, they have no foreign exchange reserves. Their foreign exchange reserves are maybe 1/30th of Israel, 1/40th of Israel, and they're very small. So actually, they're living hand to mouth. They sell oil, money is transferred, they use the money to import food and import other things the Iranians need. As of now, people in Tehran who live on salaries are going hungry because the inflation is so fast. As I told you, the currency has depreciated 1,000 times. Imagine you need 5,200 shekels to buy a dollar, right? That's what the situation is with the rial. So therefore, if somebody were to attack Kharg Island, and even if they were able to restore it as very quickly, let's say 60 days or something like that, they will not be able to have this money wired to the central bank. Therefore, they won't be able to buy things. And therefore, there's going to be an economic real problem. Right now, as I say, families are going hungry in Tehran because the inflation is so quick, so rapid, that even if their wages and salaries are increased every single week, not every month, but even every week, they still don't have enough money to buy things on the market. So nobody is attacking Iran. Iran attacks everybody. So maybe the time has come to change that. So I'm going to stop right there.
Okay. There's a lot to digest there. I want to take a step back. Israeli political strategy, internal and external, it looks very Byzantine in some ways. You constantly have a central group playing various internal groups against each other. There's constantly conflicts being blown up between the Haredim versus the secular versus the religious Zionists, Arabs versus Jews, settlers versus people living on the other side of the Green Line, Ashkenazim and Mizrahim. And also externally, there's an aspect of this. And it's nothing new, but it's going back decades, where Israel stood up or allowed Hamas to stand up because they thought it would be a good counterbalance against Fatah. They were friends with Iran against the Sunnis. Now we're friends with the Sunnis against Iran. The Kurds versus Saddam Hussein, South Sudan, and so on and so forth. Is this? Do you share in this assessment, and do you think this is a sustainable strategy?
Well, listen. The strategy is a terribly, terribly cynical strategy, but it may not be cynical enough. You see, the realm of strategy is not the realm of moral accomplishments. It's not the realm where you gain virtue. And if you're good at strategy, you definitely do not want to use strategy in dealing with your spouse, your children, your family, or your fellow citizens. You deal in the methods with enemies that you have to stop, and sometimes enemies that you have to destroy because it's getting boring to stop them, and so on. Stopping is very important, but it may not be sufficient. So Israeli policy is cynical and pragmatic, opportunistic, and fluid. And all of those things are morally reprehensible. Morally upright people go straight. They say what they mean what they say, they will say this and they will stick to it and all that kind of stuff. That is morally superior, and it's intellectually simple, and it doesn't create problems, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it's the worst possible thing to do in the actual existing world of small, medium, and large powers, which are either, most of them are asleep most of the time, or at least they don't need to be active. If Israel were located somewhere like Fiji, or between Fiji and Tonga, that Israel will be able to pursue all those things without having to be Machiavellian, to be complicated, to be sophisticated. It could be all very straightforward. Now, in regard to Israel itself, when I had the gun in hand defending the state of Israel, I was aware of the fact that there were all these people who were not participating in the war because they preferred to wear the kind of very long clothes with which it's difficult to be an infantryman. But I thought that it was very important to maintain a core of these people. Several thousand should be in Israel to study, to do what Jews are supposed to do, which is to study Torah and contribute to Talmud. When, over the years, their numbers increased, it became increasingly unpleasant. It's not a matter of their consequences, but the fact is that I do not understand how a man wants to grow up without actually learning to defend his family members, his nation, his neighbors, his brothers, his cousins, the people belonging to the house of Israel. I don't understand how this is. And I particularly don't understand it when this is connected with religion. Because the studying Talmud is actually something. I have a grandchild who is very interested in studying Talmud. And he's also interested he's 12 years old. He's also really, truly, deeply interested in Talmud. And he may become a Talmudist all his life. He's also very interested in using his air rifle in a very proper and, technically effective way. He practices, and he very systematically, we have a kind of backyard quite large, and he systematically fires at the target from a longer and longer distance. He wants to be able to use his rifle very effectively. And he's definitely willing to fight. I have another grandson who is actually in high school in California, whose current plan is to, instead of going to college, his plan is to join the IDF. He's already talked to them, he's been there, he's practiced, he's getting ready, and so on. So I do really seriously, I find reading Talmud really interesting. I have a friend in New York who's a Talmudist, and he sends me, sections to study either texts or problems or some. However, not serving in the Israeli army is not actually defensible. And all these leaders from the Litvish or whatever community they are, I'm a Luttwak myself. All these people who treat the Israeli army as an abhorrent institution, they really ought to move and to emigrate. And enough pressure should be put on them until they emigrate. And because if they play a very important role outside Israel in maintaining the Jewish people, because their way of life is a way of life that generates lots of children, and we want a Jewish nation, but they shouldn't be in Israel. Also because if they move out of Jerusalem and places like this, there'll be lots of real estate that can be cleaned up and inhabited, which will attract a lot of immigrants. If people in France and these other countries, the United States, find out that you can go to Jerusalem and get to a wonderful place and so on, but they really should not be in Israel. They really should not, because they're breathing air that is needed by other people who are able to defend the state of Israel. And their refusal to defend it is not to be tolerated, and I have no sympathy for it. Now, of course, David Ben-Gurion in 1948 made the right decision. Subsequent Israeli governments made the right decision. Nobody wants to start a Kulturkampf, a religious war, a war of religion, or anything of the sort. But now the situation has evolved to the point where it is not tolerable for people who are serving as conscripts. My nephew just joined the army quite happily, actually. He looked forward to it, and even in the middle of a war, he seems to be quite happy. However, we can't have this anymore. I mean, people who walk around and who avoid service are one thing, and leaders of movements who attack service in the Israeli army as an anti-religious, anti-Jewish thing, these people should emigrate. Let them go to wherever they want to go, Montevideo or New York City. But I think that the Israeli state should gradually force them to choose between serving or emigrating, because it doesn't really work for them to be there. Maybe one could have a number. Let's say you want to have 1,000 people who would something, but you can't have this situation where you have Haredi philogenitism combined with leaders who expressly attack serving in the Israeli army on moral grounds. They say it's immoral to be a soldier. If they're pacifists, they should really go away, because they're breathing air and drinking water that they should not have. And I'm convinced that if they emptied out Geula and these places and left, I think there'll be immigrants who come specifically to live in Jerusalem, and who, of course, will, them and their children and son will serve in the army and so on. The Israeli army is not an auxiliary element of the Jewish nation. It is the very institution that creates the Israeli nation by assimilation of immigrants and upholds its values most effectively and develops the country technologically. So it is very appropriate. So the Jews should have an army. I'll say one more thing. When the British government committed itself to the Balfour Declaration, the prime minister who had to implement it was David Lloyd George, who was what you would call today, he was a liberal then. He would be called a socialist now, or Labour or something. He came from Wales, and he was the prime minister, and the head of the Imperial General Staff met the prime minister and said, we can't implement the Balfour Declaration. And the reason we can't is because we would be betraying our Jewish citizens of Great Britain, and indeed Jews around the world, because they would then go to Palestine. And then we, the British Army, would have to protect them because they would be attacked by bandits, by Bedouin marauders, by Arab nationalists, people like that. The Arab nationalists was not the phrase at the time, but already there was, there'd been a protest at Versailles against the Balfour Declaration. There had already been a protest. So he said, if you, Prime Minister, you proceed with establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine, we, the Imperial General Staff, would have to allocate troops to protect the Jews because, of course, the Jews will need protection because there are very few of them. There are many Arabs. Jews, of course, don't fight. Jews don't fight. Everybody knows that. And even though he was talking when the commander of the Australian Expeditionary Force was called Monash, who was a Jew who found, not some accidental Jew or part-time Jew, is Monash who founded the big synagogue in Melbourne, Australia. He commanded the entire Australian Expeditionary Force, which was pretty large. In spite of that, the chief of the Imperial General Staff, whose name I forget, unfortunately, said we would have to protect the Jews forever. And Prime Minister, we have the British Army, as it is scattered in Africa and Asia and as far as British Honduras, and we just don't have the troops. Lloyd George said, well, I'm a Bible reader, and I want to tell you that whenever the Jews had their own country, they fought like hell. They were relentless. And he says the worst war that the Romans had was the Bello Judaico, the Jewish war. That's what he told, and I'm going ahead. And that is how the last attempt to stop the mandate, the British mandatory Palestine by the Imperial General Staff, was defeated by a Prime Minister and so on. He, by the way, is also the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, a Bible reader, of course, from Wales, where they are serious, they read the Bible seriously, is the one who, in negotiating the border, the French wanted Metula, because they were getting Lebanon and Syria, the French were. The British were going to get Iraq and Palestine. And they wanted Metula. And Lloyd George said that's impossible because everybody knows that the land of Israel goes from Dan to Beersheba, not to Elat, by the way. It's from Dan to Beersheba, River Dan or whatever, and so that's how he did it. So, in other words, the Jews are a fighting nation. Lloyd George knew that in 1922. Various people forgot that, and it is a very noble thing. It is a sweet and noble thing to do that. So I'm afraid the time has come to really force the Haredi, because, as you know, the army has just published the number of Haredi soldiers that have entered the army, and the total is ridiculously small. They made this big push, and I think they got 700, not 7,000 or 70,000, they got 700. So this is what I also think.
Okay. So you touched on something that I want to discuss a bit further there. Our military is not merely the executor of policy. It's a social institution, and as are our security services. And for the several years leading up to October 7th, we had a series of protests that were increasing in intensity, number against Netanyahu, which were very heavily, participated in by people that were close to senior people in the military, generals, people serving in the family members of people in the Shin Bet, the Mossad, and so on. And this culminated in 2023, in the summer, a year ago, where the party line became that if the judicial reform goes through and if you guys don't give us what we want, you meaning the elected government, you will not have an army, you will not have an air force, you will not have military intelligence, because all this stuff is reliant on reservists, and the reservists will not show up. And we saw that all the way up to the Secretary of Defense, Gallant, they quietly agreed with this. Bibi attempted to fire Gallant. Then I guess somebody explained to him that it wasn't in his powers. And several months later, we actually didn't have an army or an air force or intelligence on October 7th. And so we see that this kind of, you could say, cold civil war or proxy class warfare led to a disaster. So how do you see this, and how do you see it developing in the future?
Yeah, well, listen, as you told you said yourself, I'm an historian, intellectually, that is, I'm an historian, social. History is the serious social science. That's what it is. It's social science, but the serious one, because it's based on evidence and documents, and it's not based on what people come up in their heads or so. So the other thing is that I knew Bibi Netanyahu very well just before he entered the Israeli politics. In fact, he came to my house, which I still live in, and asked my advice on how to become prime minister in Israel. And I gave him my advice, which is, you're a television celebrity because of your UN activities defending Israel. Go back to Tel Aviv. Don't meet with any politicians whatsoever. Instead, get yourself a car and tour every single branch of Likud, from Metula to Eilat. Usually in the back of some gas station or something, there'll be a table, there'll be a few old guys. That's a local sniff of Likud here and there. Go and visit all of them. You're a celebrity. They'll be happy to meet you. And when you have the party congress, you'll have huge support from these ordinary people. Whereas the big guys in Likud will want to deal with you the way they deal with all famous people who return, which is to grind them down into small powder. So he followed my advice, and he was always very kind whenever I wanted to speak to him and so on. And that was a long time ago. Now, I would have joined every demonstration against Bibi Netanyahu, while appreciating that he was a true patriot who walked away from becoming a millionaire in the Boston Consulting Group. His friend, tried to keep him there. And he went to Israel to serve, and then he served in the Sayed Matkal. It was 5 years, not 2.5 years as he then was. He was wounded and a real patriot and everything else. And then a wonderful minister of finance and a perfectly good prime minister until his coalition with Labour failed. From then on, he did something that in democracies, prime ministers must not do, which is to remain in power, to form coalitions, to remain in power, which include more and more extremist elements. That is, micro parties, one-man parties, two-man parties of extremists that must be kept away. Israel, regrettably, does not have a minimum percentage entrance qualification. That is, proportional representation, but there's no minimum. All over the world, when you have proportional, you have a minimum to keep out crazy people.
We do 4 seats.
What?
4 seats.
Every democracy that has
we have in Israel a 4-seat minimum.
What? Where we have what?
We have a 4-seat minimum.
We don't have a 4-seat minimum. You don't have 4-seat minimum.
Sure.
No, so you mean to say the Gvir has 4 seats and Smotrich has 4 seats?
Either they both have over 4 seats, or they're running as a coalition.
Oh, they're running as a coalition. The point is that a prime minister must not include people like that in the government. Coalition governments are normal. Presidential systems is United States and France, and everybody else is parliamentary systems, and these parliamentary systems are always coalitions.
I
but
apologize.
It is a responsibility. Yeah.
I apologize for interrupting, but Ben Gvir ran on a combined ticket with the religious Zionists, and they got 14 seats, which is certainly not a micro-party.
Okay, fine. So the
that's
point
more
is,
than any of the leftist parties.
Very good, of course. The fact is that prime ministers who want to be in power have to form coalitions all over the world. It is very unusual. As I say, presidential systems like France and the United States are there are only two of them. Very usual, but it is the moral responsibility of the prime minister not to be in power with a coalition that includes unpresentable extremist people. You don't allow unpresentable extremist people who are not welcome in the capitals of the world into your coalition. And because if you do that, inevitably the moment will come when they will force you to choose between remaining in power in some situation where you really need to remain in power and you can just can't walk away, or do extreme things that are very costly. These individuals are not patriots. They are people who are acting out some personal psychodrama of their own, because patriots have to be cool. Patriots who have to be cool people, who are cool when they use force, cool when they negotiate, and people who have not people who posture and prance and stand about and like to come up with extremist phrases here and there. Such people exist in every political system in the world, but responsible prime ministers do not include them in coalitions. They say, well, if I have to have him in my party, in my coalition, I won't be prime minister. That is their responsibility. All over the world, as I say, there are coalition governments, and all of these coalition governments are governments that has to function. And one way you have to have as many people in a coalition as possible, but you also have to exclude certain people because they're very extreme and they will cost you. Your nation will have to pay the price for it. The amount of bad publicity that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have generated for the state of Israel, the state of the Jews, the amount of that publicity shows that they are shameless. Shameless, they are the opposite of patriots. Patriots don't do those things. And Prime Minister, the reason why people have turned against Netanyahu, including many former supporters, is because no responsible prime minister agrees to form a coalition with people like that who damage the state of Israel every time they say anything. Whenever they open their mouth, they're damaging the Jewish cause all over the world, which has some importance, and the state of Israel, which is very important. And so that is why I would have joined every demonstration, because Netanyahu crossed a line, and that line is that you must form a coalition government. You have to have people you don't agree with in the coalition, but you keep out wild dogs. Wild dogs you don't bring into a coalition. And these people, as I say, every single statement ever reported by the world press, made by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and so on, has damaged the state of Israel. Very much damaged it and demoralized Jewish supporters of the state of Israel, driven Jewish supporters away. There is already a movement, of course, in the United States, the sort of an assimilationist movement, whereby they say that, and of course they have a doctrine that makes it very easy, tikkun olam. What is Judaism? Judaism is helping poor people. Or Judaism is to overcome white supremacy and rubbish like that. And so there are these idiots who already exist and proliferate, and so on. And that is a very great danger. You see, whenever Jews are prosperous, safe, and tranquil, they assimilate and disappear. That's what happened to Egyptian Jewry. I blame Caligula, the notorious Roman emperor. Caligula, whose real name was Gaius, because the Jewish delegation came from Alexandria of Egypt to complain that the Greeks were attacking the Jews because the Jews were so successful, and the Roman governor sided with the Greeks, which is in fact his job, is to side with the majority against the Jewish minority. But they went, Philo, the Jewish philosopher Philo, led the delegation to Rome. This is not legend, it's history, documented history. And the Emperor Gaius met him, Caligula, and first made fun of the Jewish delegation, saying, how can you live without eating pork? In the wintertime here in Rome, when it's cold, there's nothing better than eating pork between two pieces of bread, the pork burger or something. And after doing that, he said, yes, I heard you. And so he summoned the governor, the Roman governor of Egypt, to Rome. And when he arrived, he met an accident. His throat ran into a sword. And after that, the next governor protected the Jews. So the Jews were prosperous, successful in Egypt, and very well protected by the Roman army. And the result is that 300 years later, there was not a single Jew. They'd all become Hellenized. They joined the theater. They went to do sports. You had to do sports in Greece, ancient Greece. The sports were done naked. And so they all became athletes and philosophers. And Philo himself, the great Philo, already he was losing, he was more familiar with Greek than Hebrew and so on. So in America,
well,
this is what,
nephew,
in this situation, we can't afford one Smotrich and one Ben-Gvir. We can't afford them, not for 5 minutes. And their supporters are people who are very guilty of the greatest crime possible, which is to be politically naive. No crime is greater for a Jew than to be politically naive. Jews can't afford to be politically naive. To do that, you have to live in Berkeley, California, preferably become transgender, then you can be as politically naive as you want. Jews cannot afford that. Not the Jews of Israel, not the Jews of the United States, not the Jews of France. Political naivete is a crime. People who are politically naive should be outside politics. They are monsters. And everybody understood that Netanyahu's 6 coalitions included more and more extremists. His last one, the current one, is intolerable. And that's why I would have demonstrated against my former friend, Bibi Netanyahu.
You brought up Philo, and of course, for the audience, we should mention that his nephew, Tiberius Alexander, was the chief of staff for the Roman forces that destroyed Temple. But it would seem that in this case, it was the opposite. Philo was very sophisticated. He was not politically naive, and yet the support that he was able to gather in Rome was what led to our destruction. But let's
No, wait.
No?
Wait. Philo also represents the Jewish victory, because the leader of the Greeks in Alexandria, who were attacking the moral intellectual leader of the Greeks, was a Greek intellectual philosopher called Appian. And what happens is that we do not have any work at all from Appian. He's disappeared. Whereas in the collections of Greek philosophy, including my collection, which I have a few yards from here, which is the Loeb Classics, a Greek text with the translation and so on, there are 12 Philo books, and Appian disappeared. So the fact that Philo integrated with the Romans, and the Romans protected the Jews in Alexandria, were part of an imperial system which favored the Jews very specifically. In Rome, it became fashionable for upper class Romans not to eat pork. The Pork Merchant Association in Rome complained that Jewish influence meant that fewer and fewer you went to an upper class Roman house, they never served pork, and so on. There was a kind of Judaizing intellectual trend. And now remember that the people that Philo's descendants fought against, this is Bar Kokhba, right? And you know what Bar Kokhba represented? He represented apolitical, performative violence. Bar Kokhba did not win. He lost. He caused destruction. He did not secure anything. People like Bar Kokhba were condemned by all the intellectuals of the time. They called him Bar Kokhba, they insulted him in various ways, but no insult is sufficient for somebody who rises up against the Roman Empire without having the means to win. If you start a war against the Roman Empire and you cannot win, you're not a hero. You're not a hero. You should not be praised or applauded. You should be condemned the way the Bar Kokhba was condemned. Bar Kokhba, they called him, or whatever bar they called him. It in the realm, when you're dealing with a nation and a culture, Jewish nation and a culture, which is not like other nations and other cultures, of course not, then you have to realize who Bar Kokhba was. He's the one who destroyed the Jewish cities, institutions, and so on, for the sake of prancing about and showing off and making things. Just like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. They just want to stand there and say extreme things, and we're and the cost they don't care about, the political cost. The point about the Jewish thing is the Jews must win, not lose colorfully and heroically. They must win. They must win. Bar Kokhba was defeated. His uprising failed. It caused a lot of destruction. And the fact that Philo of Alexandria's descendant would participate in the destruction of Bar Kokhba says nothing about his attitude to Judaism, because he could have done that as a sincere and deep and honest patriot. The Roman Empire was a good thing for the Jews, not a bad thing. And by the way, the Romans never interfered with Jewish communities. They allowed them to expand until 1940, until the Second World War. In Greece, for example, in Ioannina, there was a Jewish community that was not Sephardi, that did not come from Salonika. It was the Roman community, the one that had entered under the protection of the Roman Empire, where Christians who wanted to attack Jews in Ioannina were stopped by the Roman authorities. So strategy is not a sentimental field. It's not like singing or poetry, where you prance about and you say strategy is a serious business. It is the business of securing nations, families, states, and cultures.
A little bit more on the tactical side. I have many friends who are reservists in Gaza. They're back and forth between Gaza and their homes. We're hearing increasingly an outcry that all these people all these religious Zionists are serving there. Something like half of casualties to date have come from the religious Zionist communities. And they're coming back and they're sharing their impressions with me. And the impression they're sharing is that the senior leadership of the IDF wants to make some sort of ceasefire and withdraw. And the field grade officer ranks and down, the soldiers who are there are not willing to accept this, because it would not be a victory, it would be a defeat. And so they're describing something like a soft coup d'etat almost, where the political pressure from the bottom of the army is affecting the strategical decision-making on top.
Listen, Israeli soldiers, Miluim and so on, they're citizens as well, and so on. But listen, I've been to Israel only twice in the last 4 months, so I'm not really totally up to date. When I go to Israel, I actually go to a specific army facility, an army institution I won't mention, which does the monitoring of combat monitoring, to actually know what happened yesterday. And they, before, with the general idea of suggesting improvements to make it better. I'm talking about very tiny tactical things, not strategy, who should Israel fight or whatever, but not even operational level, tactical level, and even some, really specific things about how to use it. And there rises important questions about how certain weapons are actually functioning in combat, not the way they were advertised and so on. So I'm familiar with this flowback, and I'm also realized that many people don't want to stop. Many people want to stop the fighting because they're tired. There's a huge problem. Not huge problem, but it's a very big problem because of reservists who have one-man shops, reservists who have one-man jobs, individual contractors, and for them, it's economically very difficult, very difficult. They're not worked for companies that cover them and so on. They are not state employees. There's an acute problem, which is a real issue. But what you're referring to is reservist ideas about strategy. Now, the reason why people I really respect, like Israel Ziv, Israel Ziv is the most authentic possible thing. I met Israel Ziv around the world, not just in his house in Israel. I met him in action. Ziv says, we are experiencing diminishing marginal returns, which is that you commit a brigade into action or a battalion, and on day one of this war, you could kill 50 Hamas. Then it was 40, 30, and now it takes a lot of force to find and kill one, because, of course, the numbers have been greatly reduced. There is a debate of how many Hamas soldiers have been killed and how many survived, but it certainly is diminishing marginal returns. It's like you make the same effort as you did last week, but last week you may have killed 3 with the whole force, or 4 or 5, and now you're going to have 3 and 2 and 1. That is the argument for stopping, diminishing marginal returns. And because continuing involves very high costs, including Hezbollah. Hezbollah is now totally committed vis-a-vis their fellow citizens in Lebanon, that if there's a ceasefire, they have to stop as well. And Hezbollah has just failed to launch a big attack, but Hezbollah is causing real damage. I have friends who live along the Lebanese border, and so stopping the war in Gaza would mean not killing a rather small number of Hamas people that will survive. That's what it'll mean. But, of course, the war must be stopped in such a way that, of course, Hamas does not win a political victory. But continuing to fight, that activity of continuing to fight, that can be stopped because it's diminishing marginal returns. I don't know if you know Israel Ziv, you know who he is and so on, you don't. Israel Ziv was a regular general like many others in the Israeli army. Then he went, like some do, went overseas to foreign countries and provided different trained bodyguards, but also led military actions for various governments. And that is where I met him, because I do that sort of thing myself. And he was wonderful, absolutely superior, wonderful, very generous. At one point, I was in a situation where I went in with not enough people. I asked Israel Ziv if he could send me some people. He immediately provided 2 excellent people. And so I hardly knew him. I just said, Israel, אני כאן במדינה, במקום הזה, and he must speak. He was a wonderful guy. And on October 7, Israel Ziv jumped into his little car, drove down to Gaza, and killed some Hamas, saved some people, the same as Yair Golan. Now the 2 of them did the same thing. They're above all Alufim who acted immediately, and with results of saving people and killing Hamas. So Israel Ziv believes that it's diminishing marginal returns. It means the fighting is yielding less and less killing of Hamas, and so the fighting should stop. Of course, it doesn't mean that Israel will now give Gaza Strip back to Hamas to do whatever it wants. There will have to be arrangements, procedures, coverage, presence, troops, and so on. But fighting must stop because it's diminishing marginal returns. You killed 1,000 first day, then 500, and now it's 1 or 2 a week. That's not good enough to continue a war that is enabling Hezbollah to be in business. Hezbollah is totally committed to stop. And it's very important for them to stop so people can go back to the north, and also that would be the proof that Israel could destroy Hamas in Gaza and they have to stop fighting, and the northern and the people living there can go back and reestablish the important thing, which is adding from the beginning, from Ohevet to the present moment. Zionism is about another field, another midrash, another things, another house, another farm, another this, another that. And that is a process that must resume in the north, which was interrupted by this war. Actual Zionism in a field. Adding one house, one field, one thing, and while you're building up the state. And it's very important now because there are people around the world who want to emigrate to Israel. There's people waiting to do Aliyah. And for them also, this war must stop. So I disagree with people who want to continue. They should stop. I agree with Israel Z.
Do you think that Israel has a cohesive strategy?
Yes, it has a very cohesive strategy. That strategy from first day, which is to ward off enemies, to keep enemies away while you're building a house and working a midrash, a field. That is the Israel strategy, is to build up the state, item by item, building by building, hotel by hotel, moshav, kibbutz, kfar, whatever it is. That is the strategy. The strategy, and you see, if you have any other definition, you'll be wrong. Before 1918, a big strategy was dealing with the Ottoman Empire. Do we attack them? Do we cooperate with them? And so on. Then it became dealing with the British. Then it became dealing with after 48, it was, of course, dealing with the French. And then each of them disappears, goes away. And right now, the United States is dependent on the United States. But that is only because of the fact that there is Iran and so on. And that is why I believe that Israel should stop fighting in Gaza immediately, stop the war completely, expect Hezbollah to stop the war, and then Israel can rebuild and take more immigrants arriving. People want to make Aliyah. There's a big number of them right now, and build up the state. And at the first opportunity, if the Iranians are not satisfied with that, if the Iranians still want to continue, then the time has come to revoke the law, Obama's law that Iran can attack anybody, but nobody must attack Iran. This law must be finally revoked, and Israel has the target, a good target. And the Iranians can't respond to that good target because once the Israelis bomb Kharg Island and stop them loading petroleum, their regime might not last. You see, Israel never fought the Ottoman Empire, but the Ottoman Empire was strangling the Jews in Palestine, strangling them. But then the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, and then the British Empire collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the time has come for the Iranian Empire to collapse. And the only way it can collapse is the same way as the Ottomans collapsed, and the Soviets and everybody else, which is through internal action. Israel's allies are in Tehran. The allies in Washington are very important. Israel's allies in Tehran are more important because this regime now has 20% support. At the last election, you could measure that because of abstentions. Has about 20% support. And if with the economy already in acute hyperinflation that makes people hungry, if the Iranians don't shut up, simply shut up and stop doing stuff, the moment has come for Israel to knock out Kharg Island. This will be, of course, raise the price of oil globally. which will not cause a lot of crying in Saudi Arabia or Dubai and places like this. We can't fight it. First, withdraw from Gaza, stop the fighting, give it up, and do whatever arrangement can be done, can be negotiated with whatever parties want to help, whether it is the Moroccans or the Emirates or Egypt, who knows, whatever you can be patching up. And then, if Hezbollah doesn't stop, then Israel should not attack Hezbollah. Absolutely not. They should attack Iran. Because you have to go to the head of the snake. Hezbollah is the tail. So then attack Iran. And you don't have to bomb Tehran, full of Israel supporters. The people in Tehran have grown to hate Hezbollah, hate Palestine. In the Tabriz, there were famous big soccer stadium in Tabriz. Tabriz is a wonderful city. It has the finest, most wonderful kind of markets are in Tabriz, not in Tehran. And in Tabriz, every time there's a football match, the people come with posters and the flags and say, no Palestine, no Palestine, no Hezbollah, Iran, no Palestine. People in Iran believe, which is not entirely true, that the reason they are suffering economically is because of all the money, all the Iranian oil revenues are sent to Hezbollah and sent to the Houthis and Palestinians and Hamas and so on. It's not really true. There's also the question of clerical corruption. They have, like in Israel, you have a lot of people going around wearing long clothes and the beards and things who don't work, but they eat. Actually, they suffer from overweight problems. And so they are eating probably as much as Hezbollah and Houthis and the Qataib are eating of the Iranian oil revenues. But strategy is about winning, and its purpose is to ensure the safety and prosperity and growth of the nation. So from my point of view, building a house anywhere in the territory, anywhere in Israel, working a field, starting an enterprise, that's Zionism. But to continue to fight in Gaza when you're killing fewer and fewer people of Hamas and prolonging the war is completely wrong. Strategy is not a sentimental field. Whenever you feel very sure about something, emotionally, it's wrong.
You wrote several books discussing industrial strategy as a key component of political strategy. In the current war, it's transpired that Israel no longer produces its own artillery shells and is reliant on the U.S. for everything from munitions to helmets and vests. The IDF's recently threatened court-martials for soldiers who use donated equipment, while the soldiers are saying, listen, all of our equipment is donated. It's not clear where the budgets have been going. A big part of our GDP goes to military budgets, and it's not clear why we don't have a serious domestic military industrial capacity. For instance, in Egypt, they make 152 millimeter rounds for NATO, for Warsaw Pact systems, and 155 for NATO. And they can sell to the Ukraine, they can sell to Russia, they can sell to NATO as needed. And therefore, they have sovereignty. We don't seem to have a sovereign industrial policy anymore, unlike the 80s and the 70s and so on. Do you think that this is going to change in the future?
Well, listen, it was a matter of priorities. You may recall that Iran launched a combined attack against Israel using ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, 30 cruise missiles, many more ballistic missiles, as well as drones. Now, by sending drones towards Israel, they were providing Israeli pilots and also the British and French pilots in Jordan and the Jordanian pilots, providing them with targets, usually Israeli Air Force has to spend a lot of money to get targets, to have targets to shoot down. The Iranians very kindly provided these, generously provided drones that Israeli Air Force could shoot down. They were shot down by different people, but a lot of Israeli pilots got excellent practice with very good training with that sort of thing. But also there were the ballistic missiles. When the ballistic missiles were launched against Israel, they were intercepted. And they were intercepted in space because the distance from Iran to Israel is such that the ballistic trajectory goes into space. And they were intercepted in space by an Israeli system called CATS. CATS Shalosh, CATS Time, they call it Arrow and so on. Now, at the present moment, if the North Koreans launch a ballistic missile against San Francisco, the U.S. has no ballistic missile defense. Russia does not have a ballistic missile defense. Nor does China, because they have this theory of mutual assured destruction. I'm vulnerable, you're vulnerable. That's how we avoid war and so on. It has worked so far. But Israel has ballistic missile defense. Nobody else does. So one consequence is that certain countries that need it, who feel they need ballistic missile defense because they are not part of mutual assured destruction. They don't have the ability themselves to attack with ballistic missiles. Those countries are already in the process of negotiating with Israel to buy the Arrow system. In other words, Israel had to make a choice. Do you produce ammunition which has the characteristic of you can buy ammunition from any sources, A. B, you can store it forever, and it's going to be good for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Or do you invest in systems like ballistic missile defense and air defense against Kela David and etc. So Israel made a decision, which I believe is 100% correct, to become dependent on foreign sources for ordinary things that you can buy anywhere at any time with a little money, versus putting its own effort in developing unique systems that don't exist in the world at all, and which Israel needs. Like the Namer vehicle is made entirely in Israel. The Namer vehicle enables you to go through an urban space like Gaza without losing 50 soldiers killed per day. Depending on estimate, when the war started in Gaza, was that Israel would lose approximately 50 to 100 people disabled per day. Some of whom would die, others would not, but who were disabled and wouldn't be able to take part in the fight. That was not an exaggerated number. It's actually a rather modest number for urban warfare. Well, it didn't happen for a variety of reasons. One of them is that Israel has Namer. How many countries in the world have a vehicle like Namer? The number, any country other than Israel, that number is zero. Nobody else has a vehicle that you can put infantry, send it into combat, and absorb any number of RPG attacks and even cornet attacks, and as well as mortars, artillery, all kind of stuff, and come out without casualties. Namer, you cannot buy on the world market. Namer is made in Israel. Israel needs Namer. Same thing, of course, with the Chetz. So the decision makers decided Israel will not produce this item and that item that you can buy on the world market from any number of suppliers. It will produce things that you cannot buy because they don't exist, or if they do exist, and so on. The exception, of course, is aircraft. But of course, Israeli combat aircraft exist either for air defense, for which Israel has these aforementioned systems, missile systems. So it doesn't actually need to fly airplanes for air defense, or they are useful. And as for bombing aircraft, Israel does have bombing capability. Western Yemen has no electricity because of one attack that burned all the oil there. So it has an aircraft that can bomb. But if it doesn't have aircraft, if the Americans don't sell combat aircraft, Israel can still attack with its missiles, its ballistic missiles. That can go a long way, and of course, with some strike drones and so on and so forth. So, if I had been consulted professionally, as I might have been, because I've done this kind of work for different countries around the world, and I've been involved enough in Israel to, for example, I took part in creating a whole special unit, entire unit. I've done things. If they had consulted me, they didn't. But if they consulted me, I would have agreed 100% with this dependence on the U.S. for bombs and artillery ammunition, because you can buy them. This is the kind of stuff you can buy on the world market. It's always available supplies. And that's why everybody sticks to calibers. Like you pointed out, the Egyptians produced 152 millimeter, the classic Russian or Soviet caliber, and 155, which is the Western caliber. And Israel has 155, not 152, although it had plenty of captured 152 artillery in the past. And then you combine this ammunition. If the Americans don't sell it, somebody else will. But you cannot buy CATs. You cannot buy ballistic missile defense. You can't buy that.
Well, there's a global shortage of 155 nowadays, but
yes, because of the Ukraine war.
Of course,
because there was no war for years. Nobody wanted to buy them. You know, if people don't buy cigarettes, there'll be no cigarette supply. So nobody wanted to spend money on ammunition, so there's a global shortage. When the Ukraine war started, there was only one gunpowder factory in the United States. Only one gunpowder factory. So people are gearing up. But I don't think Israel should produce 155 ammunition. Israel should get it from the U.S., and if he can't get it from the U.S., he has to buy it from whatever source, and so on and so forth. Remember that Israel does not import mortar ammunition. Mortars, Israel has big mortars, 160 millimeter mortars, has 120 millimeter mortars, and of course 81 millimeter. And they may import 81, but I don't think they import the 120 and so on. So, you have to prioritize. You cannot have everything. Having everything means you have nothing. You must choose, and I totally agree with the choices they made. Had I been consulted and done a study, I would have come to the same conclusion.
Well, they are ramping up production of 155 right now. Elbit got a massive.
You mean they're restarting production?
They just yes. They just
I know.
$1.6 billion.
They're doing that because the facility that used to produce it in Israel was not destroyed, dismantled. It was simply remained inactive. Yes, they did. But, it was a choice because they, if there wasn't the Ukraine war, they would have bought it on the market. So, Israel has the means to be strategically independent of everything except ordinary things. Of special things, it is independent. Israel does not depend on the outside world for ballistic missile defense because it doesn't exist. The Russians don't have it, Chinese don't have it, the Americans don't have it, Israel has it. So the people who made the decisions 20 years ago to do those things, all of them deserve 2 pras Israel each. One should go back. I know one, Uzi Baram, who was probably has a pras Israel. If not, he should get another one, even if he has one. These people made the right choices. This is the kind of thing Ben Gurion did. Ben Gurion was infuriating for naive Zionists, when he made the deal with Konrad Adenauer for the German reparations. They really, all these hotheads were shouting in the Knesset, getting it from Germany. I'd rather die than to have anything from Germany and blah, blah, blah. Okay, shut up, go home, and do something. But Anybody who brings emotions into the arena of strategy is somebody who is very reprehensible, very shameful thing to do, very stupid thing to do, and very wrong. They're the kind of people who supported Bar Kokhba, fighting against the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, which was very favorably disposed to the Jews all along its existence, until you fight it and even survived the Jewish revolt. Josephus was right, and Philo of Alexandria's nephew was right. You don't fight empires that are pro-Jewish, as the Romans definitely were. I don't know if you remember, but there was a revolt of the Maccabees against this Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the Seleucid descendant of Alexander the Great, the general Seleucus of Alexander the Great. There was a revolt, and the Jews killed the garrison in Jerusalem. Well, it happens to empires, there's a revolt and kill your local soldiers and so on. Then the imperial army arrives and kills everybody. Well, an imperial army was arriving. And he came down the Derech HaMelech, from Haleb, what is now Haleb and so on. They came and to reoccupy the Jewish land that the Maccabees were after the Maccabee revolt. The Seleucids died or evacuated, and now the imperial army arrives with elephants and cavalry and so on and so forth. And a Roman senator called Gaius Laenas Popilius went to Jaffa and met the army that was coming down from Syria to Jaffa before going up to Jerusalem to find and kill the rebels, the Maccabees and so on. Gaius Laenas Popilius was there with 2 servants, and the army is standing and the whole army is arriving. Eventually, Antiochus Epiphanes, they tell him there's the Roman senator standing there. So Antiochus Epiphanes goes and meets him. And Gaius Laenas Popilius tells him, you must go back to Syria. Go away. The Roman Senate has decided that this land should be free, and you must leave. And he asked permission to speak with his advisors. And Gaius Laenas Popilius, facing an entire army with 2 servants next to him, said, no, I won't let you talk to anybody. And he had a long, thin stick, a vine or something, and threw a circle around his feet and said, you will answer me before you leave the circle. Yes or no? And he said yes and withdrew to Syria. Why? Because his cousin, the fellow Macedonian descendant, king of Greece, had just had a similar encounter. And the result was the Roman army arrived at the Battle of Pydna, destroyed the Macedonian army of Greece, and the king lost his throne on that day and his life. So Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the cousin of the Macedonian ruler of Greece, decided it's better to surrender. From now, the Romans were pro-Israel. They were pro-Israel. And the Jews behaved very poorly with the Romans because of fanatics, people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who were not silenced and put aside. It was a big mistake, the Jewish revolt. Josephus was right. And an even worse mistake was the Bar Kokhba revolt. And this time, the descendant of Philo was acting as a Roman thing. You'll remember, of course, that after the Jewish revolt, a Jewish king remained in Galilee. As I say, and the Romans, of course, were very pro-Jewish throughout their empire. In fact, when Jews started emigrating to what is now Marseille and southern France and so on, the Roman authorities were very favorable to that, which is understandable because in Rome itself, the upper class was Judaizing. The upper class, as the pork merchants complained, it says more and more people are following this horrible Jewish behavior of not eating pork.
In the grand strategy of the Roman Empire, you pointed out that while during the first century of CE, Rome was surrounded by all sorts of client kingdoms, including the Judean one. Within a century, they had all been subsumed into the Roman Empire. Any sovereignty, vestigial sovereignty they'd had left had been stripped away, and that was the end of them. And you describe how this follows inexorably from the logic of client-patron relations.
Yeah, of course. But you have to understand that plenty of Jews prefer to be ruled by Roman administrators rather than Melech Herod, than Herodes. And that happened. The client states disappeared without any local revolts or local complaints. They disappeared because these client rulers were less and less necessary. Originally, they were needed because Roman conquered territories and they didn't have officials to collect the taxes and administer and so on. Eventually, they developed this administration, so they no longer needed to keep a little kinglet with his little court and his little crowns and his little girls and boys, slaves and things like that. They didn't need to keep them anymore because an efficient Roman administrator could come and do their job. So anyway, the Jewish nation survived in the Roman Empire. They didn't survive in the Mediterranean Sea or the Atlantic Ocean, or they survived in the Roman Empire. That's where they survived. That's where the bulk of them survived. There were some in the Persian Empire, of course, and some also went through Arabia all the way to Yemen. But mostly Jews survived in the Roman Empire. And the only thing is that over time, they moved from the Mediterranean to the northern parts of these Mediterranean countries, like then entered Germany in Rhineland as Germany was colonized, etc. But it was the Roman Empire. Every Jew who survived in Europe survived in the Roman Empire, which was very favorably disposed to Jews.
Oh, certainly. Shortly after the last Lebanon War, you wrote an article where you recommended that Israel focus on developing its infantry to engage the enemy. I think you even used the word bayonet in there somewhere, to engage the enemy on the ground and actually take and hold terrain, as opposed to investing in the Air Force and more high-tech weaponry, and emphasizing.
When was that?
I want to say I read the article in like 2012.
You don't remember the title?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I tried to look it up. I distinctly remember the message was that we should rely more on the bayonet and less on the high tech.
Correct. But that was at that time. At that time, it was, this is the time that led up to the 2006 war against Hezbollah, which was chief of staff was the Air Force officer. Prime Minister had no experience in war to speak of, and Israel overused air power, and as opposed to ground power. So I may be a genius of some sort, but I was not at all being original at that time because everybody was saying the same thing, and I agreed with it, which is that there was an overuse of air power. There were very few ground engagements in that war. One of them was the Sayeret Salchanim, I think it was, that fought against some Hezbollah soldiers and so on. There should have been more infantry action in order to teach Hezbollah what is the difference between one of their fanatics and a well-trained Israeli soldier. In that combat there was, in the limited ground combat there was, they lost 400 Hezbollah infantry in fighting just against the Sayerot that were against them. And there should have been more of that. Air power, air power destroys buildings, doesn't kill that many people. And in 2006, Hezbollah used they did all the usual propaganda stuff, having dolls in the ruins, as if a child there had just died, and it was his. Yeah, they did all kinds of propaganda, which was politically expensive. Bombing, uh, to have bombing should have high value, highly concentrated, and very well delineated targets. You have to have high profile, valuable targets, and then bombing can be very effective. If you're fighting against low profile, poorly identifiable targets, which are not critical nodes, not just buildings, they have to be critical nodes, then bombing is politically expensive, also economically expensive, and it doesn't get you very much. Infantry is the way to go. I mean, I started in the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. I was a cadet, first at the age of 13 with the 22, then with the short Lee Enfield. The short Lee Enfield that was called short because it was so long. It was a rifle with a bayonet. And I believe in the infantry. And the sergeant who trained us had been at El Alamein, because this is only 1960s, only 20 years later. And that sergeant wanted us to dig our bayonet into the body of this German soldier that was standing there, made, dressed up, German uniform, the stuffed thing, and we stabbed him with a bayonet. And when you stabbed him with a bayonet with enough enthusiasm, the sergeant would say, "Very well, Her Majesty will give you some rounds of ammunition. Now you can start shooting. First, you have to show that you really want to kill that German with your bayonet. And now, when you really showed enthusiasm, here, have some ammunition, we'll start shooting training." I think there's a lot to be said for before you bomb, you have to figure if you can do something with ground forces.
So, one last kind of open-ended question. Before the war started, the party line, so to speak, in Israel was that we are going to have a smaller, smarter army. We don't need so much infantry anymore. We have all these wonderful technological achievements. We have the Iron Dome. We have anti-ballistic missile technology. We have Unit 8200 and the cyber operations and so on and so forth. And the war started. And that, of course, our enemies were deterred by our technological sophistication and so on. They were afraid of us. And the war started. The intelligence apparatus was nowhere to be seen. The Air Force was nowhere to be seen. All due respect to Yair Golan driving down there with his personally owned weapon or whatever he had, but that's not really a substitute for functional infantry, as you alluded to. What are the incentives that led the military apparatus to this state? And if we have a ceasefire tomorrow, will it not simply immediately start returning to the same state the day after?
No, they won't. So first of all, I have to confess that I lost my old contacts in Israel. Did not gain new ones until this war with the Matkal. I used to always have contact with Matkal for decades, and then I lost touch. And I did not know that they were making this disastrous decision to reduce the number of chativot mil that could be mobilized. They made that decision, and I was not aware of it. It's a familiar one of embracing the latest technological twist and forgetting about the infantry. This is illusions. For obvious reasons, this is a global error that people keep making, which is to think that you don't need the infantry because you have this or you have that and so on. I was not aware of this. Had I been aware of it, I would have produced my infantryman's perspective and tried to influence it. But I was simply not aware of it. I was inattentive. I was doing other things. I didn't realize that. And I was shocked to discover, as the war started, that the scale of the action in Gaza was much smaller than I had anticipated. I thought that brigades would enter separately but together. Concurrently, simultaneously, they would enter Gaza, Gaza and Khan Yunis and Rafah all at the same time. And when I realized that they were sequencing them instead of being concurrent, I realized that they didn't have enough ground forces, considering also the ones they kept in the north. And then only then it occurred to me to ask my friends what the hell had happened. And only then I discovered that they had reduced the number of reserve units that were kept in a state of readiness by call-up and training and equipment refreshers and so on. It was a terrible mistake. I don't think they're going to make this mistake. They will make this mistake again, but only probably in 30 years. They won't make the mistake again. And in fact, as you know, their increased service, and that is why the Haredi thing has now come up. The numbers have arrived. The Haredi have not, in fact, volunteered. They haven't done their part to solve the problem by simply having various heads of yeshiva take the strongest students, physically strongest, mentally less, and just say to them, you now go to the Jews. They didn't do that. And because of that, I say, let them emigrate. Let them go and find elsewhere to live. In Guatemala, or wherever they want to live. But the point is, Israel will not, the Israeli general staff will certainly make this mistake again, but not for 30 years. You see, this is it's a mistake every military has made many times, to believe that you don't need the infantry. You don't, because the artillery dominates the battlefield, or armor, everything is going to be armor. The war will be armor mechanized. They always think you can do without the infantry. And then when a war happens, same thing, that you can do everything with air power. Only when the war starts, people realize that you need mortars. Margimot, the mortar, the most humble weapon. In peacetime, nobody wants to spend one grush on buying margimot or the bombs for them. In wartime, the first thing you need is margimot. So it's a constant. People do the same mistake, and they'll probably make it again, but not for 30 years.
But the high-tech parts of the military, the intelligence apparatus, and the Air Force was also nowhere to be found on October 7th.
Yeah, of course not. Of course not. They made a mistake. The head of 8,200 said it's all our fault. The head of Amman said it's all our fault. The head of Shin Bet said, no, it's all our fault. They have definitely not avoided responsibility. There's no point. Listen. What?
They've not resigned.
No. Of course they resigned. They immediately put in the resignations. As soon as the fighting stops, they're going to go. One of them has already left, by the way. But the point is that the story about surprise is a fake story. Every time you hear that people are caught by surprise and they're stupid or whatever, it's always wrong. I'll give you the example of October 7 in October 1973 war. Okay? When the war started, there were 411 soldiers along the Teala. There were supposed to be 22 Ma'uzim strongholds. Only one was manned at Port Fuad. The Egyptians could never take it through the fighting. How does that come about? It comes about because in March of 1973, there was intelligence that the Egyptians were going to attack. Therefore, the Israeli army mobilized. The whole economy paralyzed. They did the Giyus. They went there. They had the forces mobilized and everything else. And the Egyptians saw that the Israelis were mobilized. So the Egyptians didn't attack. So it wasn't just that. You now have a horrible dilemma. They're not attacking. Do I go home or do I stay mobilized? And then you stay for a while, and then the costs pile up, and then you go away. And now, the second time the Egyptians start preparing, you say, no. The last time we mobilized, and then nothing happened, and so on. And so the people who had said they were going to attack in March of 1973 were discredited, and so on. At that time, I was working for Amman, for research. Merkar Amman, there were two colonels, Colonel Bandman and Colonel Maron, also known as Maroshi, a man of wonderful jokes, straight from Budapest, who became ambassador to Hungary after 73 war. Yonah Bandman was described as the worst man in the world because Yonah Bandman says the Egyptians will not attack. Why they won't attack, Yonah? Because they will lose the war, even if they catch Israel by surprise, even if the SAMs are blunting the Israeli Air Force and shooting down Skyhawks and everything else. Nevertheless, Israel will win, and must win because they cannot degrade the Israel Air Force enough. Yonah Bandman was 100% correct. 100% correct. He's a brilliant intelligence officer. The Agranat Commission accused him of being the worst person in the world, but he was a brilliant intelligence officer. But the only thing he didn't consider is that Sadat would start a war even if he was going to lose it, because he had no intention of winning. He had no intention of marching to Tel Aviv. So he had no intention of winning and was prepared to lose for the sake of getting diplomacy going. So Sadat showed himself to be a great strategist. And of course, the head of the Amman, Zaira, was condemned, and Bandman was condemned, and all that stuff. And what was Maroshi's objection? Maroshi did not say that Sadat will start a war even if he is losing. What Baron said, was that 100,000 high school graduates were in the Egyptian army. In 1967, it was fellahs, the bewildered, confused fellahs taken from their fields with indifferent officers. Now we have 100,000 high school graduates. These are patriotic, intelligent youths. So Maron said, watch out with your plans. You will not be able to scatter them by sending some gdudim of tanking. You'll have to really fight hard. He was ignored under the heading that they won't fight at all, they won't attack at all, and so on. So every army makes the same mistake. In peacetime, they neglect. All of them want Mach 7 jet fighters with, massage machines or whatever. And then the war starts, you need khir, you need infantrymen, and you need mortars, and you need howitzers, and basic stuff like that. Everybody makes a mistake. Israel made it October 7, and they made the intelligence mistake. Now, what is the intelligence mistake? Is that they were not ready when Hamas attacked. Answer. If you allow the enemy to build up weapons and training and tactics to attack you in front of your house, right in front of your house, you allow the enemy to be there and to train and prepare and to build up weapons, you will be caught by surprise. So therefore, you have to do the atrocious thing. You have to do the impossible, atrocious thing. The atrocious thing is that on a sunny day, when all is peaceful, the Israeli Air Force has to start a massive bombing of Gaza. The artillery has to be lined up. The Margimot have to be lined up to smash Gaza. And everybody will say the Jews are the most cruel and they're worse than the Nazis, etc., because it was a beautiful sunny day. Children were going to school in Gaza. Other people were there, and some people were even walking on the beach, even if they don't swim. Suddenly, Israel smashes Gaza. And that is the only thing that would have avoided October 7, a preemptive attack. Israel launching an attack by surprise to flatten Gaza, destroy Gaza from the sea, from the air, from the ground. And then everybody will have a reason to do what they did at Columbia University, which is to blame Israel. But you go to a prime minister, and even if he's Attila the Hun, not just Bibi, but ferocious guy and so on. And you say, we must start the war against Gaza because otherwise they will catch us by surprise because they're 2 kilometers from my house or 1 kilometer from my house. So you have to destroy Gaza. That's it. Gaza delenda esse. You must destroy Gaza, okay? Like the Romans destroyed Carthage. Delenda, Carthago delenda. You must destroy it. So Cato the Elder went in the Senate. No matter what the subject was, it was about taxes, tax regulations or traffic regulations in the city of Rome or something like that. He would say at every meeting of the Senate, we must destroy Carthage.
This seems more extreme than anything that Ben-Gvir or Smotrich have said. But okay.
This is, what I mean is that this is not possible. This is the only thing that would have prevented the attack. Would have been an all-out destruction of Gaza launched preemptively. But that is not feasible, was not feasible. I'm very glad nobody did it. I wish they were a little more ready. But the main thing is this. 1967, I arrived and I joined the Haga, actually in Kfar Blum, but Kfar Blum is several kilometers from the border. So we were in Amir, actually, with weapons. And I want to know where the Haga was. There was no Haga in Gaza because a lot of people living there didn't believe in guns. They're very nice people who didn't believe in guns. And I don't understand why a Jew who is living near Gaza did not have guns in his house and ammunition and readiness to fight. And that was because of their sociology. The people, I understand that they were driving patients to Hadassah Hospital from Gaza and things like that, which is a very nice thing to do. It's good for propaganda, but you also have to have guns in your house. You have to be ready. So there was no Haga. And Haga is the only thing that could have been useful, given that the strategic move of destroying preemptively happens to be politically impossible. Politically impossible. No prime minister, even if it wasn't Bibi Netanyahu, but it was Attila. Attila the Khan would have agreed to start a war against Gaza on a nice, peaceful, sunny day like October 5.
Well, Ben-Gurion launched a preemptive strike now.
Yes, Ben-Gurion launched a preemptive strike. You're talking about, which war are you talking about?
Well, Ben-Gurion and, forgive me, Eshkol launched a preemptive strike in 1967.
Yes, you're talking about Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan was brought by public opinion into the government, and he decided that he did not want the Egyptians to start this war, and he started the war. And he had the Air Force with a plan ready and so on and so forth. Definitely. So yes, they made the decision, and they won the war very quickly, and everybody applauded them, and nobody blamed them. However, if you had started the bombing of Gaza by Air Force, artillery, Margimot, Tachkanim, and all that, I think there would have been some criticism of Israel.
Oh, for sure. But then again, we wouldn't have had hundreds of hostages and massive,
absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Massive atrocities and so on. So I just have...
Where was the Haga? The first people responsible for what happened is the people living there who did not have a local defense. They were living there as if they were living in Beverly Hills.
Well, by
the way, they need defense even in Beverly Hills.
They'd had Kitot Konenut, which had been stripped of their rifles by Benny Gantz.
No, nobody.
Yes.
They didn't want them. They asked the army to take them away.
No. The army. I remember 2-3 years ago had a massive push to pull small arms back from Kitot Konenut for the reason that the Arabs were stealing too many of them.
You mean the Bedouin? The Bedouin.
Bedouin Arabs.
Our Bedouin, wonderful Israeli Bedouins that we all admire.
Yes.
You know that I'm familiar with the Bedouin village of Arab al-Aramshe, which is on the Lebanese border. And I was very very unhappy to hear that they were attacked on October 7th by Hezbollah. People came in and attacked them. They're near Kibbutz Elon, where I was a few months ago. Not a few months ago, now it's a year plus. for the bar mitzvah of my grandson, Kibbutz Elon, and they're next, very close, like a kilometer from Arab El Ramsha. I love Bedouins. I spent so much time with the Bedouins in Negev and Sinai. Admirable people. And of course, they steal weapons from careless people. But when you have weapons, you're not supposed to be careless. A soldier who allows his rifle to be stolen, or a settler, or an inhabitant, or a member of Haga who allows his rifle to be stolen, is responsible.
Well, the solution was to take their weapons away, which is how we got where we are. But
No. But they accepted this and even asked for it.
Oh, perhaps.
They didn't block the streets. They didn't demonstrate.
That's true.
They should have asked for more weapons and more ammunition. And they did not ask for it.
Well, they were busy demonstrating for other things.
Look. Whenever people are caught by surprise, there's always great explanations. But the truth is that they will be caught by surprise, and defense systems have to be based on the presumption that you will be caught by surprise. That is the only sound way to build a defense system.
That brings me to my last question for sure. When your strategy is defensive, the enemy always has the initiative, the big picture. As you described in 1973, they can launch a halfway mobilization, and they can basically keep you on your toes until you become complacent, and they can choose the time and manner in which they will attack you. Is Israeli strategy kind of doomed by geopolitics to be defensive?
No, not at all. In fact, Israel could have attacked Iran and not listen to the White House, who said, well, the Iranians failed, so let it go. They could have attacked Tehran. Or more valuably, Kharg Island, and stopped their export of oil. And also bombing Kharg Island would have doubled the price of petroleum, which would have reinforced Israel's best friends in the Arab world. No, Israel is not doomed to be defensive. Israel took the offensive in 1956. Israel started the war. In 1967, he started the war. And then, of course, it has carried out numerous small attacks, raids of different kinds unilaterally against the Arab enemy. So defensive fighting there's been much more offensive fighting and surprise attacks than there have been defensive fighting. I mean, October 7 was the day of Hamas. They had no plan for October 8, October 9, October 10. They just didn't have a plan. And so Palestinians, the reason why Palestinians in the West Bank have done so little, so little, is because they realize that Hamas are totally irresponsible. They attack and they have no plan for the Israeli counterattack. So, this war will teach them that you start a war against Israel, it means you're going to lose your house. And maybe you lose a family member, a child, or somebody, a brother, sister, or something. Hani himself lost his grandchildren. I have my grandchildren. His grandchildren, the only ones he has who are alive and well are the ones living in Israel. He has 2 sisters living in Israel, peacefully.
I believe one was arrested recently.
No, there were 3. I'm not counting the arrested one. He had 3 sisters in Israel. Only one was arrested.
So far. But
no, the other two have children who they're Bedouin children, and a couple they worked for the army as gashashim.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, yeah, I mean they are. It is wonderful. I mean, you don't like gashashim, but I do. I had the best time with them.
I'm sure. I believe Hania lost children before this war started, and it didn't. He
probably has multiple wives, multiple children. He can afford to lose some to it. But now, of course, he is himself dead, so he doesn't suffer from that problem anymore. And he had a good career, till a certain point. And then he made a mistake of go to the same guest house of the Revolutionary Guards, the same guest house, stayed in the same room. Why? Because it's the best room in that guest house. On his fourth visit, that was his last. When you stay in hotels, you get the reward. Every time you stay, you get the reward. Next time you go, they'll give you maybe a free night and something. So he was trying to get the reward by staying at the Revolutionary Guard Hotel in this part of Tehran. A nice building, by the way, good architecture. So he was trying to be a frequent hotel guest there. And he overdid it, and that's how he got killed. If he had changed hotels, it would have been much more difficult.
Okay. Well,
good. I'm glad
you've given me 2 hours of your time on that happy note.
Yeah. Well, I want you to persuade you to be a militant, to get rid of Smodrich and Gvir, persuade them to emigrate or to shut up or to get out of politics, because people who are in the political field for emotional satisfaction and to generate emotional satisfaction are criminals. You should be involved to achieve real concrete results. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luttwak. I appreciate your time.